Okay, so this video is going to be about the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and I have a weird thing that I do with Rainy where I put blankets or something over him. Sit. You just for a minute. Or I put like a blanket or something over him, and I go, "You're a little old gypsy puppy." So I had to. He's a little old gypsy puppy. And he's like, "Yes, now take this off of me so I can leave and try to maintain my dignity." There. You can have your dignity back now. Are you happy? He's like, "You took my dignity, now give me my window." So, this is what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be talking about The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which the Disney movie came out in 1996. It's actually, it was one of the few movies that they were doing at the time. It wasn't really based on a fairy tale that could be easily interpreted. It was, of course, based on the book from 1831 by Victor Hugo, about the story of the Hunchback of Notre Dame. He also wrote, Les Miserables, the book that the musical is based off of and everything. And so it was, the book itself is very dark. I will go over some of the differences between the movie, the Disney movie, and the book. The biggest main difference is that Esmeralda does not die in the Disney movie. She does die, and I think Quasimodo dies in the actual book. But the Disney movie is a lot more uplifting in my opinion. But the Victor Hugo version, the book, was probably a lot closer to real life. Um, the dog has his window for now, so we'll see how happy he is with that. In the background, we have my Hunchback of Notre Dame book, and I don't have any gargoyles, unfortunately, that I would be able to haul upstairs, so we have a lion that's kind of plaster-ish and that scarves. Because Esmeralda, gypsies use lots of scarves in the movie and such like that, and her scarf that she uses throughout the movie kind of becomes a bit of a symbol. Um, so we'll see what happens with that. The movie is, of course, a lot less dark. There are still dark moments in the movie, of course, and I'll be going over some of those. So let's just start out. The movie opens in 1482. And the narrator of the movie is a gypsy named Clopin, who is kind of, he's a storyteller and he's kind of like the leader of the gypsies, and he's a puppeteer, and he's telling a group of children the story of the Hunchback of Notre Dame. And the story begins with three gypsies, takes place 20, the explanation of, how it's the explanation of how Quasimodo got to Notre Dame. And in it, we have the explanation of there's three gypsies trying to sneak into the city. One of them has a baby, and they get caught by Judge Claude Frollo, who is this. He hates anything that's not, what his opinion of good and normal are, is what he's supposed to be the representative of. And he's the minister of justice, is what he's supposed to be. Um, and he's kind of the de facto ruler of Paris, so he's kind of the leader of Paris at the time. And one of the women, well, the woman that's there, she's attempting to escape. She has her baby in her arms, and she's attempting to escape, and Frollo chases after her, thinking she's has something that's stolen. And there's this chase through Paris, and we have the opera singing of the bells of Notre Dame, which is the first song in the movie, singing over the beginning of the movie. And she's running through Paris that night, and she tries to get to Notre Dame, and she tries to plead for sanctuary, but unfortunately the doors are locked and she can't get in. And Frollo catches up with her, and he rips the baby away from her, and she falls and hits her head on the steps, and she dies. And Frollo has no qualms for this. She's like, "I'm guiltless. She ran. I pursued her." And everything. He has no qualms about it. And he finds out that the bundle was a baby, not stolen goods. And he's ready to drop it down this well to send it back to hell where it belongs. And then the archdeacon comes out, and the archdeacon is a good man. This this church guy is a good guy. He's also voiced by David Ogden Stiers, who voiced Ratcliffe in Pocahontas and Cogsworth in Beauty and the Beast. So, you know, he's played a villain and two good guys. I think he actually plays a villain in a later Disney movie, but it's not a, if he did, it's not a Disney movie that I care for. But so, you know, the Archdeacon basically guilts Frollo. And it's, you know, for one time, Frollo has, you know, felt guilt. And, you know, we have these images of like all the statues of Notre Dame, the Virgin Mary, the Madonna, and the, you know, the Christ child with her, and like all these angels and saints staring down at him. And he feels guilt about the fact that he is the one that killed the baby's mother, and now the baby's an orphan, and, you know, and he, you know, the deacon's like, take the baby, raise it as your own. And Frollo's like, fine, but let him live here with you. Like, you were just told to raise the baby. Putting him in a church to be locked away in a bell tower is not necessarily the equivalency of raising it. So that's basically what happens. We, you know, the Quasimodo, which the name means half formed, is what Quasimodo means. And he, you know, the Archdeacon apparently agrees. And, you know, Frollo gets, you know, raises Quasimodo, and, you know, 18 years later, in 1502, is when the main part of the story takes place. Quasimodo is developed into a kind young man. He's, you know, 20s, and, you know, his friends are these three gargoyles that come to life on top of, you know, there are three gargoyles from Notre Dame that come to life, which, of course, you know, Disney looks at Notre Dame and, you know, they see these gargoyles and it's like, let's make those talk. It's like their answer to that. It's like, oh, look, gargoyles. Let's make them talk. I'm like, hey, it works for that. And, you know, and then they have like a whole Disney animated series about gargoyles. Has nothing to do with the gargoyles of Notre Dame. I was trying to remember if Notre Dame actually even appears in that. I don't remember. I don't know. But Quasi has these three gargoyles, Victor, Hugo, and Laverne. Victor is the taller one, Hugo is the short, fat one, and Laverne is the old lady, who is described as, this is how the animators described her for how they were coming up with her. She's like this old lady that sits on a rocking chair with a shotgun and like 1,000 cats all around her. Only in her case, instead of cats, they're pigeons. And, you know, so the gargoyles are very funny. Victor is kind of more reserved. Hugo is much more boisterous and frat boyish, and then Laverne is, as I said. And they're Quasi's friends, and they are watching this festival is going to be going on down below the cathedral in the town square. It's called the Feast of Fools, and it's supposed to be like this day in Paris when like everything gets turned upside down, and they explain it in the song of, you know, the Feast of Fools and everything, and it's, you know, it's like they have the King of Fools is supposed to be like the ugliest man in all Paris is the one who is, you know, the king of this day and everything, and, you know, everything's flipped, and it's just, you know, a way for like all the gypsies to have fun and all the, you know, all the common folk and everything in Paris to have fun. And we have Quasimodo very much wants to go down and be part of the Feast of Fools, and unfortunately he has not been allowed out of the, you know, outside of Notre Dame since, you know, Frollo put him there. I'm like, pretty sure Frollo probably had to have like taken him back to his house and like had to have raised him for a bit and then taken him to the bell tower, because it's like having it be that like the Archdeacon is the one that raises him doesn't quite work out. But, you know, that's what they did for the movie, so that's what we get there. But Quasimodo has basically been taught that everything outside of Notre Dame is horrid and bad except for Frollo. And that, you know, that nobody in the city would accept Quasimodo for what he is, for who he is. He's a hunchback. He's deformed, and, you know, Frollo comes to visit him. I don't know if it's like daily Frollo comes or if it's like every other day or whatever. But Frollo comes and visits him, and you know, the deacon definitely knows that Quasimodo is up there because he's the one that rings the bells all the time. And Quasimodo is very devoted to that, and he takes very good care of the bells. But, you know, Frollo comes and visits, and he figures out that Quasimodo wanted to go down to the Feast of Fools, and he like reprimands him for that. I'm like, no, you don't want to go down there. they're there's nothing but thieves down there. No one would no one there would accept you. Everything is down there is horrible. And like he's basically he like drills into Quasimodo that you are deformed, you are ugly. The only one in this whole city that even cares about you is me, type thing. And for Quasimodo's life, that's how he was raised, and that's what he thinks. And that's part of the point of the movie, that he's supposed to overcome that. And so Quasi, he's kind of neglected by this, and well, he's very he becomes very down and depressed by this. And one of the things that Quasi does as a hobby is he does wood carvings, and he carves, like he's got like a carving of Notre Dame that he's made, and like all these different houses and everything from what he can see from the cathedral down into the square. And he makes these carvings of like the butcher and the baker and the candlestick maker and all these different people that he sees. And like he has one of Frollo and he has one of himself, and and he has this, so it gives him like something that he can kind of interact with. But Frollo very much is, no, you have to stay in Notre Dame. This is where you must belong. This is where you are safe. And my answer to this is, okay, I get that at the time frame when the movie takes place, the 1500s, when the movie takes place and when the book is set, that people who were like Quasimodo, unfortunately, were usually looked upon, definitely looked down upon. And, the fact that, Frollo, kept him and raised him there and everything. It's like, okay, you did that, but all you do is torture and kill and prosecute and imprison every other gypsy that's in Paris for the most part. Or anyone else who like speaks out against you because they don't agree with you. And I think it's partially Frollo. He's like, Quasimodo is kind of a shame that he has to deal with, that he pictures that he has to deal with. I think in the book, Frollo is actually his stepfather, as opposed to his adopted father. But I could be wrong on that. I don't know 100% about what I've never read the Hunchback of Notre Dame, the actual book, but I know that there's some that they do with that, where there's major differences between the book and in this version of the movie. And there's been other versions of the movies over the years, of course. But so Frollo leaves, and then the Gargoyles kind of convince Quasi that no, you need to go down there. And Quasimodo gets hit. The song is Out There. And it's his, I think it starts off a little sad, and then it turns into him, it's like, if I could just spend one day out there, among everybody else. And, we get these beautiful shots of Notre Dame and these beautiful, sky views of Paris, of looking down on, what Paris would have been at the time. And it's just gorgeous. And like Quasi running around Notre Dame, and, the Gargoyles are there, and he's deciding that he's going to go out. And, he puts up his cloak to hide who he is, and he heads off. And then we are introduced to this character called Phoebus, who is the captain of the guard, who is supposed to be Frollo's new captain of the guard. This is going at around the same time as the Crusades, because they make a reference to that. And Phoebus and his horse Achilles. You get some funny jokes. The horse is great. I like the horse. But, he sees Esmeralda dancing. We're introduced to the gypsy Esmeralda. And he sees her, and he kind of is smitten right off the bat. And he doesn't seem to have anything against gypsies, which is, a helpful thing for the movie. Again, I don't know how the characters in the Disney movie compare to the ones in the actual book. I know the Gargoyles, I don't believe, are actually characters in the actual book, and Victor Hugo did tend to stay rather close to real life, as opposed to like magic happening all the time. And I would definitely qualify the Gargoyles talking as magic, but it is hinted that only Quasi can talk to and understand and watch the Gargoyles move. So it's supposed to be, I guess, only someone that has like a certain type of faith or imagination or something like that can the Gargoyles interact with. Otherwise, it's just Quasi's crazy. If that's not the case, then Quasimodo is just insane, and probably should stay in the bell tower. Actually, well, he's not hurting anyone, but still. But that's not the point. Quasi goes down, and as I said, we're introduced to Phoebus and Esmeralda. And Esmeralda is kind of assaulted by these guards that want to take her money because they think that she stole it, even though she earned it by dancing, and they clearly saw her doing that. And Phoebus kind of stops them from hurting her, and her and her goat, Jolly, run off. And Phoebus, makes the two guards take him to the tower or the Hall of Justice or whatever it's called, and to go and see Frollo because that's where he's supposed to go. It's where he's supposed to check in when he arrives in the city. And the guards didn't realize who he was at first, and then at one point, like he tells Achilles heel, and like Achilles sits. So it's just a joke on Achilles heel. I know it's not the cleverest joke in the world, but I find it funny. But he goes, so he goes off, and on the way to the Hall of Justice, he sees this what looks like a little beggar, and he realizes that it has to be, I don't know if he quite realizes that it is Esmeralda, or if he just figures, okay, it's someone that needs money, so he takes the coins that had been dropped and he drops them into the hat for the beggar to take, and the beggar is, of course, Esmeralda and Jolly. And, then we get the Feast of Fools song. Frollo is actually Frollo, well, we've introduced to Frollo, obviously, but Phoebus is introduced to Frollo, and Phoebus learns that Frollo has this hatred for the gypsies that he always has, and he wants to crush them under his thumb because he sees them as an invasion in his city. And he wants to find this place called the Court of Miracles, which is the gypsies' haven, where they go usually at night to hide from the guards. And Frollo's been trying for 20 years to try to find it, and he just hasn't. And so, Phoebus doesn't seem to particularly like that Frollo wants to do this. He's like, you brought me back from the wars to arrest fortune tellers and palm readers. And so Phoebus doesn't see the reason for why Frollo despises gypsies. And I don't think in the movie it's ever actually explained. It's just kind of the whole, we buy it because, Frollo is the villain and Quasi and Esmeralda and Phoebus are the heroes and such. But when it comes to, I don't know 100% of Frollo's backstory from the actual book, but I'm assuming there was like something in his past that probably resulted in his hatred for that, combined with, a lot of people who were in high society at the time didn't particularly care for, anything that was different, that's from outside of what they can control. And Frollo seems to have that concept inside, be a good embodiment of that concept. But then, of course, we have the Feast of Fools songs, like everybody's singing and dancing, and all the townsfolk and everything are happy, and, Quasi is introduced to Esmeralda, and and he, she's not worried by she thinks what his face is as a mask, because everybody's running around wearing masks, because they do this whole thing, to determine the king of fools. And in this case, it's supposed to be that, the ugliest man in all Paris is going to be the king of fools. And, we have Esmeralda come out, and she dances in this beautiful red dress, which is one of my favorite outfits in all of the Disney girls, is that red dress. And Phoebus and Frollo are there because Frollo kind of has to be there as, kind of his, as part of one of his duties, as he has to be at this festival. And, they're watching Esmeralda, and at one point Esmeralda goes over, and she basically ends up getting, sits in Frollo's lap, and like basically, for all intents and purposes, flirts with him, and then she basically makes a fool of him and runs off. But she leaves her scarf with him. And he kind of holds on to that, and that kind of becomes a bit of a representation for her. But like Phoebus is watching her as well, and Phoebus is kind of becoming even more smitten at this point in time. It's like Phoebus is just funny. I like Phoebus. And Quasi is watching, and they drag all these different people, all these different guys wearing masks up on stage, and as they keep pulling off the masks, the guys are supposed to make like an ugly face. And and they get to Quasi, and the mask, Esmeralda tries to pull his mask off, and it's not a mask, it's actually him. And everybody's like, oh no, it's the Hunchback of Notre Dame and everything. Like, everyone's like, is this like a huge legend that goes around the city that, like, even though Frollo kept him secret, everybody knows about him? Is that something I missed? Um, but Frollo recognizes him, of course, and Clopin is like, no, you shouldn't, don't. We wanted the ugliest man in all ugliest face in all Paris, and here he is, Quasimodo. And so, it's like, Quasimodo is crowned the King of Fools, and, everything seems happy for a couple of minutes. And then, unfortunately, the guards that work for Frollo decide to have a bit of fun, and that results in them pelting Quasimodo with fruit, and then they get ropes on him, and the crowd helps, and they get him pinned to this wheel, and they keep throwing rotten fruit at him, and he's getting humiliated, of course, and Frollo isn't stopping this. Phoebus wants to stop it, but Frollo tells him, no, someone needs to learn a lesson. And Esmeralda comes out, and she stops it. And she goes up and she, cuts all the ropes off of Quasi and starts cleaning him off. And, then her and Frollo get into an argument, and she stands up to Frollo. She's like, you treat this poor boy the same way you treat my people, like we're nothing. And, she gets very angry at Frollo, which is understandable. And, Esmeralda gets very angry at Frollo, and that's understandable. And, she's cut Quasimodo free, and like all the happiness has kind of been sucked out of what's going on around everybody because of what happened to Quasi, because this is definitely not something that they normally do with the King of Fools, where they throw food at them. Otherwise, I don't think Clopin would have put Quasi up there if he knew that was going to happen. We don't 100% know if because Clopin's telling the story, so it's either he knows what happened because he was there, or he's just like inserting himself into the story type thing. And making it more interesting for the kids, because it's being told through Clopin to these kids to explain who Quasimodo is. And, so Clopin is like, he's telling the story and everything, but, I don't think that Clopin would have put Quasi up there if he knew that this was going to happen. I don't think that Esmeralda would have let Clopin crown Quasi the King of Fools if she knew that this was going to happen, because this doesn't seem to have happened to any of the other King of Fools. It's strictly because he's Quasimodo that this happens, because, the guards start throwing food at him, and then the people don't intervene, and Frollo doesn't have, Phoebus intervene, so it just kind of escalates, unfortunately. And Quasi has watched from up above this festival for however long, and he knows that this is not what's supposed to happen, but he is extremely, extremely downhearted and depressed and embarrassed and ashamed and everything of what happened. And, Frollo tries to have Esmeralda arrested, and Esmeralda, does, some tricks, and, with the help of the other people that are the gypsies at the show, she's able to, escape the guards and make a fool of them, and kind of make a fool of Frollo as well. She's able to escape, and, Frollo kind of confronts Quasimodo, and Quasimodo just gives him some, I will never disobey you again. And, Quasi's just broken. And Quasi heads back into, Notre Dame to go and hide again. And he makes his way up to go and hide and everything. And probably, he seems to change into new clothes and everything, because the next time we see him, his clothes are better because they're not covered in, rotten fruit, and they're not cut to pieces and such. And he's, so he goes off, and then, Frollo, it's starting to rain, get very dark at this point in time, and Frollo tells Phoebus, go and find that gypsy girl and bring her to me. And, Phoebus sees what looked like the little beggar person going into Notre Dame, and he's like, okay, well, that's where she went. And he goes into the cathedral to find her, and they end up kind of sword fighting by candlelight, but she's using this it's not a candelabra, well, it's kind of a candelabra, it's a torch type thing, and she's using that to sword fight Phoebus, and she's doing rather well with it. And they're flirting, and they're sword fighting, and there's candlelight, and Phoebus has some great one-liners in the movie. Just his lines are funny anyway. Esmeralda is not impressed with him at all for the most part. And like, she has her goat there, she has Jolly, and he's helping her, of course. And Phoebus and Esmeralda are just flirting and sword fighting, and hand-to-hand combat. And Frollo, it kind of calms down a little bit, and he's like, I wasn't going to arrest you. You're in a church. I can't arrest you anyway, type thing. And Frollo comes in, and he sees that, okay, Phoebus found Esmeralda, and he's like, oh, good, you found her. Arrest her. And Phoebus looks at her, and he's like, claim sanctuary. Claim sanctuary, because then he can't arrest her because she claims sanctuary within a church. At the time, that law was very much more followed. I don't know how that would work nowadays, but at the time, if you claim sanctuary inside of a church, then they're not, then like the police or whatever, the guards aren't allowed to do anything to you unless you step foot outside of the church. It was just, I guess it was just a kind of a, thing that everybody knew, because Quasimodo's mother at the beginning of the movie had tried to claim sanctuary inside of Notre Dame, and that didn't happen. And, Frollo's like, well, then drag her outside and arrest her. And then that's when the archdeacon shows up again. He's like, no, you're not. He basically looks at Frollo and was like, Frollo learned a long time ago not to mess with the church. And Frollo is like, Frollo's like, fine, but gypsies don't do well inside stone walls. And he leaves, or he pretends to leave, and Phoebus leaves. And Phoebus wanted Esmeralda safe. He doesn't think that she deserves to be arrested. And the archdeacon doesn't think that she deserves to be arrested either. He probably saw what happened anyway. So Phoebus is leaving, and Esmeralda kind of follows a little bit. She's not leaving, but she's kind of following. And Frollo kind of grabs her, sneaks up on her. And we get a very creepy scene, because he's like sniffing her hair, and then he like she's like, what are you doing? And he's like, I was imagining a rope around that pretty neck of yours. I'm like, even as a kid, I'm like, I don't think that's what you were imagining, dude. Even as a kid. This movie came out when I was like 3, and I probably, watched it, so many times growing up. It wasn't even funny. Like a lot of the Disney movies that came out in the 90s, I watched so many of them growing up. I could do the words. Still can. And do so many of the words line for line while I'm watching the movie. But so she's like, she kind of fights back against him, and Frollo leaves, and he's like, yeah, but gypsies don't do well inside stone walls, and he leaves, and he's putting guards all around the cathedral to make sure that she can't escape. And what ends up happening is then Esmeralda kind of talks to the archdeacon, and the archdeacon is like, okay, props to this dude, because he wasn't able to help Quasimodo's mother, 20 years ago, and he's probably trying to fight against, Frollo for a long time now, and he's probably watched Quasimodo grow up and everything. We don't actually get, in the movie, we don't get really too much of like any type of a relationship between Quasimodo and the archdeacon, but the archdeacon tells Esmeralda, stay here, you're safe here for now, Frollo's not going to come after you in the church. Maybe you can find someone here that can help you. And, so Esmeralda kind of takes that to heart. And, props to the archdeacon. I mean, if throughout the course of human history, if we had more, people like him in charge as opposed to Frollo, the world would have probably been a much better place a lot faster. And a lot less people would have died because of stupid reasons like, oh, you look different. Or, oh, your culture is different than mine. And, and that's, I think, I wouldn't say that, Pocahontas and Hunchback of Notre Dame are telling two sides of the same coin. They're about 100 years apart in the time frame that they take place in, but some of those values are still there of, one culture clashing with another. In Pocahontas, it's, the Native Americans against the settlers. In, Hunchback of Notre Dame, it's the gypsies versus, Frollo and, his definition of order and what is good and what is just. And gypsies, being outcasts, which is where we get my favorite song in the entire movie. And between this and the sequel, and I will talk about the sequel, my favorite song in all of the Hunchback of Notre Dame, both of the movies, is God Help the Outcasts, because we get Esmeralda going through Notre Dame, and like they went to Notre Dame, they drew out these different parts, they took pictures of it. There's beautiful, beautiful backgrounds that they made for it. And like she's going around, and we get the candles, these hundreds of candles that are all lit and glowing and beautiful, and she's singing God Help the Outcasts, and she's like, it's like, I'm not asking for anything for me. I want, there's other people that are so much worse than me that need your help more than I do. Help them, we still believe in you. And in all intents and purposes, it is my favorite song. It's definitely one of my favorite Disney songs overall. And, I'm the granddaughter of a pastor. And, I grew up in the church. I grew up in a Lutheran church. And, this song is like the closest thing in a Disney movie that I'm aware of that sounds anything like a hymn. And there was a book that was written, and I don't remember who wrote it, but I think it was called like The Gospel According to Disney or something like that, where I don't know 100% of what the book was about, but I think it was like where they kind of like talk about the songs from Disney. And God Help the Outcast was compared to a hymn called They Watch the Swallow or something like that. I'll try to put the name of the actual, the name of the book and the author, and then the name of the hymn here, because I do not remember what they were called exactly. But it is very hymn-like, and we get this counterbalance in it because we have all these other people that are in the cathedral that are praying, but it's all for like things for them. Like, I want fame, I want love, I want glory. Esmeralda is praying for other people, singing and praying for other people, and even asking at one point she even looks up at like the statue of the Madonna of the Virgin Mary, and she's like, I don't know if you can hear me, I don't know if you're even there, or like the first lines of the song, but I hope that you'll listen to this prayer, to a gypsy's prayer. And it's just, I just went on about it for however many minutes, and yeah. And we get, the beautiful end part of the song is, her standing in this, we get the giant, the rose window, the giant stained glass window that is thankfully still up in Notre Dame. And yes, admittedly, when the fire at Notre Dame happened several years ago in Paris, my closest recollection is, my closest familiarity with it is, this song from Hunchback of Notre Dame. And, I was happy that the window survived. I was sad for what happened to Notre Dame, but I was happy that the window survived. And we get Esmeralda stepping into the light of this, the rose windows scattered all over the floor, the light coming in from the window, and her stepping into it, and it's just gorgeous. And, and Quasi heard her singing, and he kind of followed her. And then, she spots him, and like some of the other people that were praying spotted him as well. And like, they're like, this is all your, you're the one that caused all that ruckus out there today and everything. And, why are you even here? And like, Quasi runs off, and Esmeralda chases him, and she follows him up to the bell tower. And I'm pretty sure that's what the deacon wanted to happen, that, he wanted Esmeralda to find Quasi. And they, they talk, and, she's like the only person besides Frollo that's, as far as we're aware, the archdeacon may have been up to visit Quasimodo a couple of times, but probably not that many, if at all. And because Quasi doesn't seem, you would think that if that relationship was there, I mean, like in the context of the movie, it's not something that comes up. I don't know if it's context in the book, and I could be wrong, and it might be there, but I don't know. But, so Quasi and Esmeralda become friends, and she like sees that he can do all this carving, and she calls it a beautiful talent. And she, and they talk about the bells and everything. And at one point they have, Quasi and Esmeralda are out looking out over the city and looking at the sunset and everything. And he's like, you're much nicer than and all the other gypsies I've heard about. And she's like, well, what other gypsies have you heard about? And he's like, all the ones that Frollo tells me about are horrible and mean and bad, and horrible people and everything. And she's just like, well, who told you that, Frollo? my master. And like you can see all the bell, the gears clicking in her head. Oh, that's right. That explains a lot here. Um, and she, he's like, Quasimodo, of course, has been told his entire life that he is a monster. And what Esmeralda does is she takes his hand and does like a palm reading on him. And she's like, well, you've got a long lifeline, and this line means that you're shy. And she's like, I don't see any. And he's like, any what? Monster lines. And 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 that just kind of befuddles Quasimodo. And she's like, well, I don't think that you're a monster and everything. She's like, it's just like, it's just horrible. Quasimodo's been told his entire life by Frodo that that everything about him is wrong. And, the only good thing that he's there for is because he can ring the bells, because he's strong enough to ring the bells. Other than that, there's not really anything else that Quasi can do. And, that's what he's been told his entire life. And Esmeralda is starting to kind of chip away at that. And, and she's like, well, why don't you read my palm? And, am I a monster? And he's like, no, you're not a monster. You're kind, you're good and everything. And then she looks at him and she goes, maybe Frollo is wrong about the both of us. And of course, we have the gargoyles off in the background, like trying to lip read or whatever. And they're like, what did they say? And Laverne, like, Frollo's nose is long and he wears a truss. Which is just one of my favorite lines in the movie. And then Hugo looks down at Victor and he's like, pay up. He's like, I was right, pay up. Like, Frollo's nose is long and he wears a truss. But, and then Quasi helps Esmeralda and Jolly escape. And they go off, and he helps her escape so she can go back to the Court of Miracles, and she gives him a pendant that's, it's basically, this pendant will help you find me if you need me. It's, when you wear this woven band, you hold the city in your hand. And she gives it to Quasi, and he's like, he keeps it. And she goes off with Jolly, and then we cut to Quasi makes it back up to his bell tower, of course, and he starts carving, and he carves a carving of Esmeralda, and he puts it next to the carving of him, because Quasi is in love at this point in time. She's the first person that's ever really shown him kindness, and and he's falling for her. And she's the first person that's ever shown Quasi kindness, and he's falling for her. And I don't think that Esmeralda realizes quite that Quasi is falling for her. She cares about him. She obviously cares about him already and thinks of him as a friend. But, I don't think she's quite connecting in her head that you're kind of, you're probably the first person in a long time, if ever, to show this type of kindness to him. Because, Frollo is there, and Frollo seems to have taught him how to read and write, because he can do his alphabet and everything. But Frollo, doesn't really give him any type of compassion or kindness for the most part. He gives him food, and he gives him clothing, and he kind of gave him a bit of an education, but nothing over the top. But he's still trapped in the tower. And Esmeralda, of course, I don't think she quite realizes that, Quasi is falling for her. I think she realizes he sees her as a friend, but not necessarily in love with her. And Quasi, carves this, statue of her to go with the other ones. And he sings, what's the song? Holy Light. Holy Light is the song that he sings. And, and he's, ringing the bells at the end of the day. But on the way back up to the tower, he had an encounter with Phoebus. And, he basically threatens Phoebus of, if, don't hurt Esmeralda, don't go after her, sanctuary, you're supposed to stay out and everything. And Phoebus is like, okay, I'll leave. Just, tell Esmeralda, that I'm sorry, I didn't intend for her to be trapped here. And, like, Quasi has Phoebus, like, held up, and, like, they're on steps, and, like, Phoebus is kind of, like, lifted off the ground to show how strong Quasimodo is. Because, I mean, he rings bells for a living. He's got a lot of upper body strength. And, he has to move the bells and clean them and everything, so he's got a lot of upper body strength. And, and like, Phoebus is, like, held aloft, and he's like, can you put me down? Drop. And he leaves, but before Phoebus leaves, he's like, and tell her she's lucky. Why? Because she has a friend like you. And then he leaves. And that's kind of, Quasimodo doesn't have the biggest opinion of Phoebus at this point in time. He just thinks he's another one of the guards that's going to follow Frollo's orders. And I think at this point in time, Quasi is starting to lose whatever amount of faith he still has in Frollo. Is slowly going away. But then we cut across town to, it transitions from, because we have like chanting of the priest, and then it transitions into Frollo song, which is Hellfire. And he's singing about, he's in the song, he's talking about, this Esmeralda, this gypsy, she has to be a demon and everything, and he's got her scarf, and he's like caressing it, which is just very disturbing. Even as a kid, I'm like, why are you doing that? And like he's singing, and he's looking at this giant fireplace, and like he sees like her visage in the fireplace, like dancing and everything. And he's like, it's like it's not her, it's not my fault that I'm feeling this way. She's the one that did this. She's the one that hexed me or entranced me or whatever. It has to be her fault, and she's the one that has to pay for this and everything. And so it's not going very well for him. And I always imagine, like, if you're like the guard on the other side of the door, because at one point, like, it gets through the song, like he like has these like visage of like all these like cloaked and hooded figures that pop up, and they're singing, or like they're like accusing him of whatever. And then Frollo, there's like a knock at the door, and a guard comes in, and he's like, Frollo, the gypsy girls escaped. And he's like angry, and he's like, yeah, leave me alone. And the guard leaves. I was like, if you're like the guard on the other side of the door, having to hear him singing to the fireplace, I'd be like the guard that's like, there's like a guard that has to come and deliver the news, and like you're the guard on the other side of the door. It's like, I ain't opening that door. You can open it yourself, Fred. I'm staying right here because he's the one that started singing to the fireplace about the gypsy girl. I ain't messing with him today. This is your job. I'm just the guard outside this door. Like the other guard, what do you mean he's singing to the fireplace? Hey, just stick around for a couple of minutes and listen, and then you can tell him what's going on. And like it's like the guard's on the other side of the wall. It's like, okay, it's like if you're like in a Disney movie, and it's like if you're not the one with the song, and there's the character running around singing, it's like it was like Ariel sings on her own in her grotto and everything, under the sea is all the fish singing with Sebastian and everything. It's just like, what is all this thing going on? If you're like someone that walked in and was like, what is going on around here? Type thing. Well, we cut to the next morning, and Esmeralda escaped, and Phoebus and Frollo are now having to go and look for her because Frollo wants her for his own reasons. And so they're going after gypsies, trying to get them to tell them where Esmeralda is, drowning, kind of almost drowning them, trying to bribe them, all of that. And they're searching all over Paris to try to find her. And then they end up at this miller's house, this windmill that is also a mill for like flour probably. They go there, and they're talking to this family, and the father of the family is like, I just we offer. We offer shelter to travelers, but if there was a gypsy here, I'm sorry, blah 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 blah. And Frollo locks the family in the house and tells Phoebus to burn it down, and Phoebus refuses. He's like, I'm not going to, I was not trained to kill innocents. He's like, but you were trained to follow orders. And then they still set the building on fire, and Phoebus jumps in, and he breaks down the door from the inside and gets the family out. And saves the family and everything. And then because he defied Frollo, now he's in trouble, of course, and he has to he runs, he steals Frollo's horse and starts riding it away. And they start firing arrows at him and whatever. And Frollo, he's like, shoot him, but don't hit my horse. And, Phoebus is hit in the shoulder, and he falls off this bridge and into the water, and Esmeralda's there because she was watching, of course. And she, gets, saves Phoebus from drowning. And then we cut to Notre Dame again, and we get the song, A Guy Like You, which is sung by the Gargoyles, to Quasimodo. But, oh, she can have all these other, normal looking guys and everything. What she wants is a guy like you. She has to be in love with a guy like you and everything. And it's just a very fun song. There's lots of, outside references in it. Hugo at one point comes in dressed like Esmeralda, which is weird. But they have, like, all these fun bits and everything. And it's just a very fun song, full of, like, puns and other just, fun things that they do in the song. Kind of like in, you got, a friend like me from, Aladdin. There's lots of references there that are very much not, something that would be actually around at that point in time. But it's, just a fun song that they do for that. And it's, it's the Gargoyles trying to cheer Quasimodo up. And they, and Esmeralda shows up after the song is finished. Quasimodo's all happy and everything, and he's like, "Oh yeah, well yeah, yeah, I love her, and she's gonna love me and everything." And Esmeralda shows up at the end of the song, and she has Phoebus there because he's hurt, and Quasi shows them where they can put Phoebus, and she, we have Phoebus and her talking, and Quasi watches, and unfortunately, her and Phoebus talk, and then they kiss, and Quasi watches, and he's just heartbroken because he was in love with Esmeralda, and it's for in Esmeralda's defense and in Phoebus's defense, I don't think Phoebus quite understood what Quasimodo felt for Esmeralda. He figured she was his friend, but I don't think he quite realized that, oh, he loves her too. And Esmeralda didn't realize this either. And so that's just kind of not fun on their, it's not really their fault, but, foresight, hindsight, blah, blah, blah. And, so Quasi's heartbroken, but he agrees to watch over Phoebus as a favor to Esmeralda until he's healed, because he'll be safe in the cathedral. And Phoebus, Esmeralda and the other gypsies that help carry Phoebus there, they leave. And Frollo shows up because he had made the comment where it was like, we had guards all over the castle, all over everything, guards at every door. How did she escape? And he realizes, oh, Quasi. And he comes to visit Quasi, and Quasi had to hide Phoebus. And that was just funny in and of itself. But Quasi and Frollo talk, and Frollo basically figures out, oh, he sees the carving that Quasi had made of Esmeralda. And he's like, oh, well, this one's new. It's very good. And he's like complimenting it. And then he's like, I know where she is. I'm going to find her. I know where the Court of Miracles is. I'm going to attack it with 1,000 soldiers at dawn and, wipe out the gypsies, including her. And then, I'll free you from her spell. And he burns the doll. Much to, Quasi's horror. And I think during this point in time is kind of when, because Phoebus was kind of under the table and he kind of heard what was going on. Even though Quasi kind of kicked him and knocked him out at one point, I think. But Phoebus kind of wakes up after Frollo leaves, and Phoebus is like, okay, well, I gotta go and warn her. I gotta find the Court of Miracles, and I gotta warn her. And Quasi is like, Quasi kind of debates for a second about whether or not he's gonna go with Phoebus to go to warn her. But he does, and they go off, and they use the woven band. That you wear the woven band, you hold the city in your hand, type of a thing. And they figure out what it means. It's just kind of like Quasi going, no, it has to be here because I've looked at the city from above for 20 years. I know what it looks like. And they go to this graveyard, and they find their way down this tomb, and that's when they're ambushed by all the gypsies that are there. And Phoebus is kind of like the whole, okay, well, there's inscription here, let me determine what it says. And Quasi just like moves the top of the tomb, and he's like, or we can go down those stairs. And they, and they go work down their way down the stairs, and they're ambushed by the gypsies and Clopin, and they're taken in to be tried, even though they're not really given a trial. And they're just about ready to be, yeah, that's fun. They're just about ready to have that happen. And Esmeralda stops them, and he's like, stop. These guys are my friends. Quasi's the one that, helped me escape the bell tower, and, Phoebus is the one that saved the miller and his family. And they're like, And Clipmon's like, well, why didn't they tell us that? And they're like, we did try to tell you that. And he's like, oh. I'm like, maybe you shouldn't gag them as soon as they show up. Maybe you should let them explain who they are first. And, Esmeralda hugs Phoebus very happily. And Phoebus kind of looks over and he kind of sees the way that Quasi is like, doesn't seem to like the fact that they're hugging. And he kind of, he kind of backs off from Esmeralda. And he's like, well, it was all Quasimodo's job. He's the one that led us here, and it was his idea and everything. And like they explain, Frollo's coming. He's going to come at dawn with 1,000 men and attack and wipe you all out and everything. And Frollo, of course, had followed them and ambushed them that way. And because he knew that Quasi might be a way to lead them there, so that's how they get there. And they, Frollo has lost his mind at this point in time. And, Frollo's lost his mind. Quasi's realized this. And what ends up happening is, all the gypsies are arrested. Quasi is taken back to the cathedral, and he's like chained up to the point where he can watch when Esmeralda is going to be executed the next day. And, Esmeralda is, ready to be, burned at the stake for, being a witch, because, Frollo's accusing her of witchcraft and everything. And, Quasi is watching down, and, the citizens of Paris don't seem very happy about this. Some of them didn't like the gypsies, some of them were okay with the gypsies, so it's like the ones that seem to be, like the gypsies are kind of angry about this, but also, Frollo seems to be going way overboard with his power, considering that he's kind of dragged in the common folk into punishing them for what the gypsies have done. And, so they're not happy about that. But, so Frollo's ready to, burn Esmeralda at the stake, and he's like, but he leans and he's like, I can save you from this. If you choose me, you don't burn. And Esmeralda spits in his face, which I'm like, yeah, no, I would do the same thing. All right, well, let's put it this way. I would hope I would have the guts to do the same thing if I'm about to be burned at the stake. And it's, well, you can either burn at the stake, or you can come with me to the guy that's like the one that's going to burn you at the stake. I'm like, why would I want that? Esmeralda has always been one of my favorite Disney heroines that wasn't one of the princesses. And I like her better than some of the princesses too. Mostly like the Snow White and Cinderella and Aurora level princesses, but I like a lot of the later princesses too. But Esmeralda definitely ranks very high among my Disney heroines that I very much like, and I like Phoebus too and Quasi. Quasi's a bit more of an interesting leading man than the Prince Charming characters in some of the movies. Eric's not bad, but moving on. Quasi's watching down on this, and the Laverne and Victor and Hugo are like, you gotta, they're trying to get rid of the chains and everything to go down and save Esmeralda. And Quasi is just kind of broken at this point in time. He's broken and he's chained up, and he, the Gargoyles tried to convince him, and they're just like Quasimodo's just like, he's just not doing anything. And the Gargoyles go off to, they just go back to being stone. And Laverne's like, we're only made of stone. We thought you were made of something stronger. And Frollo lights the fire around Esmeralda, so she, the fire is starting, so there's the smoke, Usually, I think what it was with like the fires, or if you're like a witch burned at the stake, it was usually you died of like smoke inhalation to a degree before you died of like actually burning to death. I mean, like your feet were probably on fire to a degree, but I guess it would depend on like whatever they were using to burn you with. But that's a different story, and one that I don't really want to go into right now. Yeah, that's fun. But Quasi starts to fight against the chains, and he breaks the chains. And he grabs rope that's convenient, and he starts this magic rope that gets as long as he needs it to, kind of like Indiana Jones' whip. And he he swings down from the tower, and he grabs Esmeralda and unties her, and then he like whacks the soldiers around them with the burning stick, with the burning pyre, and he swings back up and climbs up the tower, and he like raises her in front of the window, the rose window, and is like, sanctuary, yelling sanctuary, everything, and like everybody down all the citizens are seeing this, and they're like, that's right. And Frollo then decides to he's like, I'm gonna now Frollo has lost his mind, and he's gonna go and attack Notre Dame herself. And, he has, Quasi takes Esmeralda inside and he puts her into this room so she's, safe and out of the way. And him and the gargoyles start fighting back. They start raining down rocks and bricks, and they start, they have like this giant vat of boiling something that gets poured over the side. And, the gargoyles are helping. And they did this funny bit because, like, Laverne, like, has all these pigeons and everything. Like, she sends all the pigeons. She's like, fly, my pretties, fly. I don't think the lady that played her played the Wicked Witch of the West, but she probably would have done a very good job if she did. So they do that reference. Fly, my pretties, fly. And, so they do that, and, Phoebus is able to, Phoebus was captured as well, and he's able to escape, and he, they release all the gypsies, and the people of Paris start fighting back, because he's like, Frollo has destroyed our city, burned our city and our homes, and now he's going to attack Notre Dame herself, and everything, will we allow it? No, and they all start going after, and they all start fighting against the soldiers, and stopping the soldiers, and trying to get to Frollo, and Frollo makes his way inside the church, and, he kind of knocks down the, archdeacon when the archdeacon tried to stop him, and Frollo makes his way up, and, they, Quasi and the others, the gargoyles had, like, beaten back, the men, the soldiers and everything, and, Quasi's trying to get Esmeralda to wake up, and she's not waking up, and, Quasi, of course, thinks that she's dead at this point in time, and Frollo shows up, and, he, for all intents and purposes, tries to stab Quasimodo, and Quasimodo fights back and stops him. And like Quasi, this is like when Quasi has realized that all Frollo has done to him his entire life is lie. And he's holding Quasi's holding the dagger in his hand, and he's like, all you've ever told me is lies. All you've ever told me that the world is full of dark and terrible things, but the only thing dark and terrible about it is you. It's people like you. And, at this point is when Esmeralda wakes up, and Quasi grabs Esmeralda, and he runs off, and Frollo starts chasing after them because he has a sword, and they're chasing around the top of the, top of the cathedral, and I'm like, it's very reminiscent of, like, the end of the Beauty and the Beast when, like, Gaston is chasing after, Beast on the ramparts with all the gargoyles and everything, and they're, chasing and running and everything, and, at one point, Esmeralda, Quasi ended up falling, and Esmeralda's holding on to him from above the, from the balcony, from, like, the railing. She's holding on to him, and he had Frollo, and, Frollo had climbed up on one of those other gargoyles and was, raising his sword and was about, he was, like, maniacally quoting something from the Bible, about smiting the wicked and everything, and he looks insane when he does it, and he's, like, ready to, I'm assuming, slice off Esmeralda's head. And then, because, if she dies, she'll let go of Quasi, and Quasi will die, and then I guess that just gets rid of all of his problems, even though you have an entire city full of angry people underneath this cathedral that are probably, the second you step out of the cathedral, are going to kill you anyway, or lock you up, or whatever. But the gargoyle that he's on starts to break, and then he falls, but he grabs onto the gargoyle, and then the gargoyle head is, like, just kind of this jutting part of the gargoyle. It's, like, just like the head, and then the jutting part that comes out is just, like, part of the design. The gargoyle head kind of comes to life and growls at him, and then he falls, and the gargoyle falls, and that's the end of Frollo. And Esmeralda's trying to, pull Quasi up, and and unfortunately she's not quite strong enough. She did just get a lot of smoke inhalation, and Quasi is probably quite a bit heavier than anything else she's ever tried to lift. But he falls, but Phoebus catches him, so, he doesn't fall too far, but Phoebus catches him and pulls him in, and Esmeralda finds her way down to them. And, Quasi hugged Phoebus, and then, Esmeralda shows up, and, she hugs Quasi, and then Quasi, he's accepted at this point in time that Esmeralda and Phoebus kind of belong together, and in this case, I don't 100% know what happened. I don't remember what happens in the actual book, but in this case, he's like, he wants Esmeralda happy, and, Phoebus has earned his respect and his trust at this point in time with wanting to protect Esmeralda, and, he just saved his life, and he takes their hands and he puts them together. He puts their hands together like this, and then he has his hands over them. And, to symbolize it, okay, this, I give you my blessing type of a thing. You two can be together, I give you my blessing. So they're all happy. And, the gargoyles are all happy, and, they, it's the next morning at dawn, and they get out, Esmeralda and Phoebus walk out, and they, all the crowds are cheering and everything. And Esmeralda walks back over and she holds her hand out to Quasi, who's still inside the cathedral, who's still inside Notre Dame. And she holds her hand out and she, gently brings him out into the sunlight. And, and he looks at everyone, like the crowd just goes quiet. Like the Archdeacon's fine, he's off to the side, but he's watching. Like the crowd goes quiet. Like there's the townsfolk and the gypsies. And there's this little girl that walks up the steps and walks up to Quasi, and she just kind of like looks at him and like reaches out and like touches him, touches his face, and then she hugs him, and Quasi just kind of relief like just falls off of his shoulders. Like this little girl, like kind of like, if it's enough that Esmeralda and Phoebus, and if this little girl can accept me, then maybe that's enough. And then like the crowd starts cheering, and Clopin, is like, hooray for Quasimodo, and they're all happy and everything and singing, and big crowd, like Quasi being carried off on everybody's shoulders, this big heroic music and everything, and that's where the end of that comes in. The gargoyles are celebrating and everybody's celebrating and happy. Now we have the cast, which is Quasimodo is played by Tom Hulse, who had played, I think he was Amadeus Mozart in the movie Amadeus. We have Esmeralda played by Demi Moore. Her singing voice is by Heidi Mollenhauer. Claude Frollo is Tony J. Captain Phoebus is Kevin Kline, who I've seen a lot of other things. Clopin is Paul Candle. Victor, the Gargoyles, Victor is voiced by Charles Kimbrough. Hugo is voiced by Jason Alexander. And Mary Wicks voices Laverne. Mary Wicks unfortunately passed away from cancer just before they were able to finish with everything for the film, and the film was released. And she actually gets the last word, the last line in the movie. When they're panning out and everything from Notre Dame, they have all the gargoyles sitting up on the tower, watching down and everything. And they have like the birds come through, and she's like, they're all landing on there. And then she's like, don't you ever migrate. She like gets angry, like, don't you ever migrate. Just angry, the birds. And it's just funny. They give her the last line of the film. But Jane Withers, in the second movie, all the people that were in the first movie came back to do the second movie, except for obviously Mary Wicks, because she passed away. They have Jane Withers comes in to do Laverne's role in that, and I think they had to do maybe a few like little miscellaneous lines here and there for Laverne in the original movie, and she did those ones. But it is Mary Wicks that does the performance for the most part. And then we have David Ogden Stiers as the Archdeacon, as I said. Move into the music. Music was written by Alan Menken and Stephen Schwartz, who had done the stuff for Pocahontas. We have Bells of Notre Dame by Clopin. Out There is sung by Quasi and Frollo. Frollo a little bit at the beginning. Then we have Topsy Turvy, which is the festival song. Then we have God Help the Outcasts, as I said, which is sung by Esmeralda. And so because of Easter, my dad and I just watched Jesus Christ Superstar, and there's a song in the movie. The movie came out in 1973. It's based on the Broadway play by Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice. Tim Rice has also written a lot of Disney songs. There is a song in Jesus Christ Superstar that is sung by Mary Magdalene, and it's called I Don't Know How to Love Him, and it's her singing about Jesus. And it was sung by Yvonne Elliman. I think I said that name right. And the songs, and we watched them so close together when we were, we watched Jesus Christ Superstar, and then we watched this, and it's like the songs sound not that they were plagiarized or anything like that, not by any of that, but it's that kind of concept of this person that's always been like an outcast is what is this still for me? And I just kind of find that like that line there, that comparison. And if you don't see the comparison, then that's fine. Just even if you want to, just go and listen to the song. It was like on the pop charts for like a year in the 70s because of the song, because of the movie, and it was great. And then we have Heaven's Light, which is sung by Quasimodo, and then we have Hellfire, which is sung by Frollo, A Guy Like You, which is sung by the Gargoyles to Quasimodo, and then we have the Court of Miracles song, which is Clopin and all the different gypsies singing. And there's a song, I think it was called Someday, that was the end credit song, that's sung by All For One, um, which is not a My Hero Academia reference at all. It was a band, it was a singing group. And I think it's the song is like someday, someday the world will be better. I think I don't 100% remember the lyrics to it, but I think it's something along the lines of, someday the world will be better. And there is an alternate version of God Help the Outcasts that was sung by Bette Midler, that is on the soundtrack. And I think there's a music video of it somewhere. But she does her rendition of it, and it's also very beautiful. Some of the differences between the book and the movie. Quasimodo is deaf and had unintelligible speech. In the film, he's not deaf, not deaf, obviously. He can speak fluently. Frollo, had willingly taken Quasimodo in the books. And, instead of it being atonement, he's 4 years old when he's taken in by Frollo instead of an infant in the actual book. In the book, Esmeralda is not necessarily a gypsy, but she's, kind of a recluse, I guess, more than anything. There's a lot of other differences, like in the book, I know that I think it is that Esmeralda dies, and Quasimodo had still fallen in love with her, and he goes to her tomb and he dies in her tomb with her, which is very dark and creepy, and I'm glad Disney didn't go with it. There's still some things in the Black Cauldron I'm surprised they got away with. I mean, in this movie they were going to burn a woman at the stake, so there's a lot of other differences between the book and the movie and everything, and it's there's a lot of it. If you want to know the differences, either go and watch one of the other multiple films that are about it that are not the Disney one, or go and actually read the book. One of the things that I do like that they did with Esmeralda is she is the first Disney heroine, female heroine, to have green eyes. And in older Disney movies, like Maleficent has green eyes, because green eyes were usually a depiction of evil. And, it's usually, someone who had green eyes was considered evil, or, was more easily accused of witchcraft and everything. And they gave that to Esmeralda instead, which I think is a very good way of doing that. To show that, green eyes are not evil. No, they're not evil. Your eye color does not have any bearing on your moral standing. Now we're going to move into the sequel. There's not really too much else besides the sequel. There's some Kingdom Hearts stuff and some House of Mouse stuff, but there's no Once Upon a Time stuff. There's no Descendants stuff, as far as I'm aware. There's not really too much else with it besides the sequel. The sequel takes place about 6 years after the original movie. It was just called Hunchback of Notre Dame 2. Came out in 2002. Phoebus and Esmeralda have been married. They have a son whose name is Zephyr, and Quasimodo is basically like a uncle to Zephyr. Quasimodo is a much more intricate part of the community at this point in time. People, he goes out of the tower a lot. He's still the bell ringer, but he goes outside and interacts with the gypsies and everything. And there is this there's this circus that's coming to town, and it's led by a man named Sarouche. I think I said his name correctly. It's been a while since I've seen the movie. But he's this very conniving man that's coming to, he wants to steal this giant bell that's in Notre Dame that is called La Fidèle, which is this giant bejeweled bell. It's like bejeweled all over the inside. And pretty much the entire plot of this movie was completely made up for the movie because there's no sequel to the book. But the movie was basically done because Quasimodo did not get the girl in the original movie. So they make a character in this who's called Madeline. This is Madeline. She works for the circus. She works for Sarouche. She's his assistant, the pretty assistant in the sideshow and everything. And she had been a little... a thief that Sarouche had taken in and raised her, and, she wants to be a high wire actress. She wants to do, trapeze type stuff instead of being, his assistant. And, he wants her to go and seduce Quasimodo. So find out information about the bell. And that's basically the course of the movie. she does go and interact with Quasimodo, and Zephyr, and Zephyr is, he's like, okay, well, let's, Zephyr's kind of worried that Quasimodo is going to, not be, if he does go with Madeline, they're not going to be friends anymore. But Quasimodo, assures him, that's not the case. And Quasimodo and Zephyr have a very good bond, and Quasimodo is probably very much like somewhere between like an uncle and a best friend to Zephyr. And I think Zephyr can see the Gargoyles move as well. I think Jolly is still there. There's several songs throughout the movie. There's one at the beginning that's just kind of like a fun song. I don't remember if there's one exactly when the circus shows up, but there is, Quasi and Zephyr kind of have a song about, sticking together and being friends. And Madeline and Quasi do start to fall for each other. And she tries, tells Sarouche, no, don't go out to the bell. Don't try to do anything to Quasi. He's a nice guy. You don't need to do that. We've got enough. And it's, it's a circus of thieves. So whenever they do shows, they steal from people, They pickpocket, they steal necklaces when people aren't paying attention because they're watching the show. And, and there's, a rash of robberies going on. And, Phoebus is, the captain of the guard type of a thing in this point in time. Of course, he's probably got a promotion after Frollo's gone. But he's trying to find out where all the stuff went. And him and Esmeralda seem to be on a very good, well, they're married, of course, so they're on a very good relationship with each other. But he and like the gypsies seem to be much more welcome into the town of Paris at this point in time, into the city. But Phoebus kind of instantly accuses the circus people of being the ones that were stealing everything, and Esmeralda didn't like this, and her and Phoebus had a bit of a fight because of that. And Zephyr kind of wants to run off and join the circus, but he doesn't. And, Quasi and Madeline bond, and, they get like this, they do get a love song where they're running around. It's like fallen in love type thing, where it's just them running around and, doing all this stuff and everything around the city. And, so that's fun. We get Quasi in a different outfit, which is kind of funny. And Quasi and Quasi and Esmeralda and Phoebus are all, of course, still very good friends and everything at this point in time. The thing with La Fidèle, the bell, is that it's supposed to be that every year, I think it's supposed to be on Valentine's Day that they set this up in the movie, that it's supposed to be every year. I think it was on Valentine's Day that they ring the bell on they ring La Fidèle, specifically that bell. And down in the town square, there's like this archway that, couples go under and they can proclaim their love for each other again. And, Esmeralda and Phoebus, they've done this every year. They've been married for about 6 to 7 years at this point in time, 5-6 years at this point in time. And so, they do that every year. And like other couples do the same thing. They go into the archway and they proclaim their love for each other, underneath the archway at La Fidèle, in front of, under, La Fidèle rings in the background. And, it goes through that, but then Sarouche finds his way into the cathedral because he's going to steal the bell. And he found the bell, and Zephyr sees him steal the bell, and then he kidnapped Zephyr, and they can't find Zephyr, of course. And Sarouche had basically framed Madeline. He told, Phoebus showed up and he's kind of interrogating Sarouche, and Sarouche basically blames Madeline for everything. It was like, I tried to break her of the habit, but she's a thief, and I can't stop her, and so Phoebus kind of falls for that, and Madeline gets taken, and Esmeralda and Phoebus kind of have a bit of a thing of like, you're blaming the circus people right away just because they're new in town for all these rash of robberies. And I'm like, okay, admittedly, if you're like a person that's, if you are someone who's a police officer or a detective and you're trying to figure out a problem, maybe sometimes looking at the new thing coming into the equation, if it may have a bearing on what's going on, isn't a bad idea. But so they have a bit of an argument with that. Because she doesn't like that Phoebus is instantly assuming that it's the circus people, although in this case it is the circus people. And, so Madeline's locked up, and they find out that Zephyr is missing and that the bell's gone. And Madeline explains it's Sarouche took the bell. He's going to use the catacombs underneath the city to sneak it out. And, and I can help you find him type thing, because they have the whole city closed off except for the catacombs. And they get down in the catacombs, and they are able to stop Sarouche, and Madeline proves herself, because he's using Zephyr as a hostage to get out of the city, because he knows that, Phoebus won't attack him if he has his son. And Madeline ends up actually saving Zephyr, because she, as I said, she wanted to be a trapeze artist, and her and Quasimodo kind of set up a trapeze over where the bell is going underneath in the catacombs. And she, walks across, and then she, hangs by her knees and grabs, Zephyr, and then they're able, saves him from Sarouche, and then they're able to, capture Sarouche and his henchmen, and, save the bell and everything. And there's various songs throughout the movie, as I said. We just watched the first one. It's been a while since I've watched the second one, but I may end up rewatching some of the sequels after we get through a few other Disney movies. I may rewatch the sequels. But then they cut to the next day, and Zephyr's safe, and the bell is there, and they have La Fidèle all set to ring, and it's Valentine's Day or whatever it is, the day of love, whatever they refer to it as in the movie. I don't remember exactly, but Quasi's up on the bell tower ringing the bell, and it's out on display for everyone to watch. And Esmeralda and Phoebus, they proclaim their love underneath the archway, as hundreds of other couples have done and will do throughout the day. And Zephyr's up with Quasi and the Gargoyles, watching Quasi ring the bell and looking out over the city. And Madeline shows up, and she tells, she apologizes to Quasi for trying to trick him, but that she does, actually love him, or feels something for him. And they kiss, and then and Zephyr's like, because Zephyr's like 5, 6, whatever, and he doesn't like the kissing. He doesn't like it when his parents do it. He doesn't like it when Quasi does it. And they end up, and he, so they're very, so Quasi now has Madeline, and like, down on the square, Esmeralda and Phoebus have proclaimed, I love Phoebus and I love Esmeralda, and then up on, Quasi and Madeline are like, I love Quasimodo, I love Madeline, whichever one. And they're very happy, and Quasi kind of let go of the rope that he was ringing the bell with, so Zephyr grabs the rope and he starts ringing it. And I think, Zephyr, can talk to the Gargoyles, and Quasi, of course, can still talk to the Gargoyles, but Madeline can talk to the Gargoyles as well, which confuses the Gargoyles, because I think, like, Laverne makes the line of, she better take good care of him, and Madeline looks at them and goes, don't worry, I will, and the Gargoyles are like, surprised that she can understand them. As I said, we got the whole cast back for this one. Chani J, of course, did not come back because Frollo dies at the end of the original movie. David Ogden Stiers didn't come back. I think it's still the same Archdeacon in this movie, but I could have been wrong. But he didn't come back to voice it because the Archdeacon has like one or two lines in the entire movie. Basically, La Fidèle's been stolen type thing. Jennifer Love Hewitt voices Madeline. Michael McKean voices Sarouche, and then we had Haley Joel Osment as Zephyr, and Haley Joel Osment, I think, also voiced Chip in the Beauty and the Beast, Belle's Enchanted Christmas, and then slight Kingdom Hearts reference here. He plays both Sora, who is the main character in several of the main series of Kingdom Hearts games, and then Ventus, who is kind of Sora's opposite bad version. It's confusing for how they do it in the series, but he's like a flip version of Sora, but he's not a good character. And, so that's basically what we get there. Those are the new characters. All the other voice actors returned. So the songs for the movie, I'm probably going to butcher this because it is in French. Le Jour d'amour, which is a day of love or something like that. It's like, or something to do with love. I don't remember what the exact translation of the title is, but it's the opening song of the movie. It's, you know, Quasi and Clopin, all the townsfolk, and, you know, Esmeralda and Phoebus singing and everything. An Ordinary Miracle is another one, which is, I think, I don't remember exactly what song that one is in the movie. I want to say that it's Esmeralda singing to Quasi, but I could be wrong. I'd Stick With You is Quasi and Zephyr singing together. Fa La La La, Fallen in Love is Quasi and Madeline singing together when they're falling in love. And then because Jennifer Love Hewitt can sing, she has a song at the end of the movie that's supposed to be Madeline's love song that is called I'm Gonna Love You is the name of the song, and it's the end credits song. Then we move on to the little bits of miscellaneous for Hunchback of Notre Dame. As I said, there's not really anything for Once Upon a Time. I don't think there's any Hunchback of Notre Dame references in Once Upon a Time as far as I'm aware. If I'm wrong and you're aware of them, then let me know. Or at whatever point in time if we get to that, since we're working our way through Once Upon a Time or a good way through the second season at this point in time, I might be like, oh, and yeah, there was something in it. We'll see. Then there's not really anything in Descendants. The closest thing that I can think of as like a slight reference for that in Descendants is that Mal in Descendants, when she's not using her magic, her eyes are purple, but when she uses her magic, particularly when she, you know, is very trying to push her magic, her eyes go green, which Maleficent's eyes in the movie do the same thing. And, you know, that's about the closest thing that we get with that to a reference there. But the side note on that too, Ben does not mind that Mal's eyes are green because part of a plot point in the second movie is that Ben had this stained glass window made of him and Mal, and in the stained glass window he makes sure that her eyes are green, specific green, and to show that he doesn't care that she uses magic, that she has this power. So that's kind of like, I guess, the closest thing to a reference in Descendants there. House of Mouse, Esmeralda and Quasi pop up in House of Mouse. Frollo pops up in House of Mouse. I think Phoebus has popped up too. There's not really too much that pops up there. They're mostly used like side jokes type thing. Then we have the Kingdom Hearts reference, beyond the fact that Haley Joel Osment voiced Sora and Vantis in Kingdom Hearts. There is a Kingdom Hearts game called Kingdom Hearts 3D, which stands for Dream Drop Distance. I think also part of the game was originally designed to be played in 3D, but I could be wrong, but it's just called Dream Drop Distance. It's a flip game where you play both as Sora and Riku. There's a couple of games that have utilized that mechanic, but this one you flip back and forth between them, and you have to, you know, run around different worlds in the different different areas that are based on Disney films. And you do run around Paris. You run around the Hunchback of Notre Dame movie, and you kind of follow the plot of the movie. So we have Quasimodo is there, Esmeralda is there, Phoebus is there, Frollo's there, the Gargoyles are there. You know, you run around Notre Dame and you have to fight different. In Dream Drop Distance, they're not heartless that you fight. It's I want to say they're called Dream Eaters, or Nightmares type thing. And you fight them, but then you also have some on your side, and they fight with you because they're like purified versions, I guess. And so you run around with that. So it's a little bit like the Pokemon mechanic where you have like animals that help you and you can swap them out in your party for new ones, or for stronger ones. And you kind of make them, and it's a fun mechanic. But that's what we kind of get for that. So you run around the Hunchback of Notre Dame world, and you fight, I think you fight like a giant gargoyle type boss at the end of it. It's been a little while since I played it, but that's basically it. So you run around Paris and everything, and Notre Dame itself. And you interact with the characters, as I said. There's not too much more that happens with that. I mean, that's just part of that's basically what happens with that. I don't think there was any other Kingdom Hearts reference or Hunchback of Notre Dame references that pop up in Kingdom Hearts. I think that's all that I got for that for Hunchback. So, you know, average length for a video, I guess, for the Disney reviews at the very least. I think the next one it's either Hercules or Mulan. I think it's Hercules that's the next one. And then it'll be Mulan. Hercules will be a single video. Mulan, because of all the live action stuff, because of the live action remake that they did and the stuff that's in Descendants and in Once Upon a Time, Mulan probably might be a two-parter. But we'll see what happens with that. So that's what I got for you. So yeah, from me and you know, my gargoyle lion and the little old gypsy puppy, if he was still up here, but he ran away. He dashed out of the room when he was no longer necessary for the video, I guess. That's what we got. I thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye.
Love is like a tree. It grows by itself, roots itself deeply in our being, and continues to flourish over in a heart in ruin. The inexplicable fact is that the blinder it is, the more tenacious it is. It is never stronger than when it is completely unreasonable.